we're good.
Sounds good.
Okay, Eileen, we're good to go.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. So good afternoon, and thank you to all who are joining us for today's press conference. My name is Eileen Park, and I'm the Mayor's Communications Director. So today, we will be announcing significant reform that reimagines what policing and public safety looks like in our city. And we will kick off with Mayor Ted Wheeler, who will then be followed by our new police chief, Chief Chuck Leavell. We will then take questions from the media, and then with that, we will begin with Mayor Ted Wheeler. Mayor.
Can you see me?
Yep.
Okay, hang on. Good afternoon, everyone. For 11 consecutive nights in Portland, thousands upon thousands of community members have come together to grieve, to show solidarity, and to demand accountability and justice for police brutality, and to demand investment in Black lives following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. For some Portlanders, this is their first protest, but for others, these protests add to the many they've been organizing and participating in for decades. The horrific murders of Black men and women laid bare a very harsh reality. Organizing and participating in for decades. The horrific murders of Black men and women laid bare a very harsh reality. Yesterday, our city racism continues. Chief Chuck Leavell. We heard from many longtime community leaders about his outstanding record, the exceptional background that makes him the right person to be chief, and his vision for upholding community and the Bureau in his decisions. I'm excited to work with Chief Leavell. I share in his reflections on George Floyd's death and the lack of compassion exhibited by the officers and by public institutions. Too often, the very institutions that are supposed to protect and serve our community have instead failed people of color, specifically our Black community. And we can't just point to this being something that happens in other communities. This happens right here in Portland. And that responsibility to reform the process lies solely with us. Mr. Floyd's murder announced that reality so loudly, so unconscionably, and people are tired and they're hurt and they're grieving. But people are also resilient, and people are also expecting changes to institutions. And I don't just mean personnel. My office has received literally thousands of emails, of phone calls, of meeting requests, of letters calling for accountability, and for major policy and funding changes in how we approach not just policing, but how we approach public safety and how we think more broadly about investing in the health and well-being of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Portland. These demands called for dismantling the police bureau, investing in Black and Indigenous lives, and introducing major public safety reforms. And I want you to know, as your mayor, I take each of these demands seriously. And I want to acknowledge the leadership, the research, the movement building of our Black leaders and Black-led organizations who've been doing this very same hard work for decades, making the same demands. For too long, the city of Portland underinvested in communities of color, and specifically our Black community. We've been complacent in passing and enforcing regulations that require full adherence to civil rights protections in our private, our public, and our nonprofit sectors. I want to make it clear the root causes, and therefore the solutions, involve much more than the city of Portland's transformation. I want to be clear, the city's transformation is necessary, and that is a responsibility that I, as mayor, and my colleagues on the city council must focus on relentlessly. The city's transformation is necessary, but it's also not sufficient for creating a more just, more secure, and more resilient Portland. We must also acknowledge the systemic divestment and the overt and implicit instances of racial discrimination of Black, Indigenous, and other peoples of color. I recognize specific demands to our city have been made from Black communities for over the last 3.5 years. I should have acted with greater urgency on these demands. My privilege as a white man, my privilege as the mayor and the leader of the institutions of power in this community, I believe shielded me from time to time from the many difficult and uncomfortable truths about our history and about our society. As your mayor, I continue to listen, I continue to understand, and I'll continue to have uncomfortable but necessary conversations to push the limits of our comforts as a community and lead our community's healing and restoration. This is a movement that calls for structural changes, but it also requires a cultural shift that disrupts and dismantles white supremacy. We don't foster the type of transformational change to reach this vision in the ways that the community desires. If we don't, we put ourselves at risk to further disenfranchise communities. My team and I spent many hours over the last few weeks talking to lots of people and listening and learning and exploring options that the city can enact immediately. And the actions and reforms I'll share today repurpose police dollars, reinvest in people to create a more racially just city, and reform public safety standards. At the end of the day, all of these things, I believe, will help lift the community and make us all safer. But we can't do it incrementally. We must do it through bold and deliberate actions. These are the actions demanded by the community and reflected in the Urban League of Portland State of Black Oregon and the Portland African American Leadership Forum's People's Plan. The public has given us this historic opportunity to reimagine what policing and public safety generally looks like in Portland and all across America. And the vision must include looking at everything, how we recruit, how we train, how we incentivize policies that we put in place, and how we engage with the community. Everything needs to be on the table. And we need to fundamentally change the police bureau and how we interact with police in our daily lives. I'll work with my city council colleagues, leaders across the region, and leaders in the community on what comes next. Around the nation, history is being written. These actions are long overdue, and government isn't doing this alone. We're doing it with you, with our community partners, with our Black leaders and community. Here's just a few highlights. We propose to redirect over $7 million from the Police Bureau and $5 million from other city funds directly to communities of color, reinvesting $12 million. We're going to dissolve the Gun Violence Reduction Team, the School Resource Officer Program, and the Transit Specialty Units. We'll stand with the Oregon Legislative People of Color Caucus to fight for urgently needed reforms, and with our federal delegation to reform the Qualified Immunity Doctrine. We'll ban chokeholds. We'll create a private right of action for intentional discrimination by law enforcement. And we'll reform the use of consent searches in traffic stops, amongst other things. To conclude, this is our opportunity to reimagine every aspect of policing together with our officers, because they will be on the vanguard of major reformation in the Bureau, and we need them, and we need to support them through these major changes. This is a time that calls for bold and, at times, as I said, uncomfortable reforms. This list is part of what's next in our immediate future. It's, of course, just the beginning. There'll be more, because this alone is not enough. Police reform is not enough. It needs to be bigger than just the Bureau, because this does not dismantle institutional racism or dismantle white supremacy. It does not correct America's cultural narrative, which has actively prevented Black members of our community from building wealth and earning living wages, from accessing education, housing, and healthcare, and from building a better life for themselves and their families. But what we're witnessing is history unfolding before our very eyes, and it's a momentum we have not seen in generations. And meaningful, lasting reform will take time, but I'm honored to play a role in helping usher in this new generation of reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. Next, we have our incoming chief, Chief Chuck Leavell.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
These are difficult times in law enforcement. Police officers everywhere are feeling like their life's work's being called into question. I support investments in color and steps towards healing in the community. We're listening and we're hearing, and we're trying to align our department with what the community's been asking for. We remain committed to building trust in the community, particularly communities of color, and delivering a high level of public service to the city of Portland. This will lead to structural change, but I'm asking the community to support our officers as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Leavell. Okay, now we will open it up for questions from the media. Members of the media, if you can use the raise your hand function on Zoom, I will call on you one by one and we will get started. Okay. Let's start with Simon Gutierrez. Simon.
Unmuting. Hello.
Hello.
A question for the mayor. Could he tell me what? Could you mute that, please? What is the estimated cost savings from eliminating the gun violence reduction team, and what will become of the officers?
My expectation is that the officers will be reassigned to patrol. I don't have the final budgetary numbers at this point.
Okay. Simon, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Lisa Balick from Coin 6 News. Lisa.
Question for the mayor. These couple of changes were expected. What else is to come?
You're going to see, today I wanted to talk about things that specifically I can do through directive. You're going to see other changes that will be suggested through partnership and collaboration, including one collaboration I hope to do with incoming District Attorney Mike Schmidt. You're going to see community-based approaches to reimagining how we do patrol. You're going to see us work in concert with legislative leaders to push important legislation at the state. You're going to see us advocate for and push for specific legislative changes at the federal level But today I wanted to talk about urgency. I wanted to talk about concrete steps that we can take today. What the community is saying loudly and clearly is they don't want to hear about incremental change. They don't want to hear about task forces. They don't want to hear about legislation that's going to be passed a year from now. They want to know what is our level of commitment today to reforming the way we do policing in this community, reimagining the way that we view public safety as a community, and how we work together to not only address these important issues, but how we broaden this movement to talk about everything from education to access to capital, to access to shared economic prosperity, to improve health outcomes, even our response to COVID. But I didn't want to talk long-term today or even medium-term. I wanted to talk today specifically about those things we can do right now and the things we are doing right now through mayoral directive.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, Lisa and other reporters who are on this call, we will be sending out a 2-pager with a complete list of the initial steps we'd like to take. So be on the lookout for that right after this press conference is over. Okay, next. Nigel Jaquist from Willamette Week. Nigel.
Hey, Eileen, if you can hear me, I think Nigel might have had some audio issues. He had a question that you can see in chat.
Okay.
Can you read it?
1 second. All right, it says, can you ask the mayor on my behalf whether these changes will mean more money for Portland street response in the 2020-2021 budget?
We have not specifically prescribed where the dollars go, but as you know, the Portland Street Response is a partnership between myself and Joanne Hardesty. I'm a strong advocate and proponent of the street response, and I'm very hopeful that this will lead to additional funding for the Portland Street Response. It's exactly the kind of reimagining public safety that doesn't necessarily require police officers to engage. In the case of the street response, it would encourage people who are EMTs or who have behavioral health experience engaging with people in crisis, rather than having to send a police officer in. And so that is exactly the kind of reform that I'm excited about, that I would hope to see funded. But again, I didn't think it was appropriate for me to sit here today and tell the community how best to spend those resources. I would expect that there will be more community input on this. As an aside, I will say thank you to the literally hundreds of people who've been emailing me over the last couple of days supporting the Portland Street Response. I stand with you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Next, we have a question from Everton at the Oregonian. Can the mayor or Chief Leavell clarify banning chokeholds being used by police officers? Weren't they already not allowed, or was that only specific holds? And I know DC Davis is with us too, so if anyone can answer that question, that would be great. Perhaps it's more fitting for Chief Leavell and DC Davis.
Sure. Right now, chokeholds are banned as a method of control, like as a control hold. We don't use them. They are considered deadly force if you have to use them in a life-saving situation. But for all intents and purposes, they are banned as a method of control.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Okay, next, it looks like we have a reporter from KBOO Radio. Will that reporter please say their name and?
Yes, my name is Jenka Soderberg with KBOO Radio. My question is for Mayor Wheeler. Will you ban the use of tear gas, flashbang grenades, LRAD, and rubber-coated steel bullets by your officers? Commit to dismantling the police department, and will you resign?
So these are the same questions you asked the last 2 days in a row, and I'm going to give you exactly the same answer both times. As you know, I committed the city to the Obama organization's use of force review. We agreed that it will be community-centered, that we will be transparent with the public about our findings, that we will enact the reforms that are put forth. That includes all use of force. As you know, I've already restricted the use of tear gas or CS gas here in the city of Portland. And I've said that I would like to get rid of CS gas. The caveat being there has to be an alternative that does not use a higher level of force and does not put people at danger. So that is very much on the table with my colleagues and myself.
Thank you. Our next question is from...
And I forgot to answer the last question, will I resign? I believe that I am the right person to lead the city through this period of reform. I'm committed to it. No, I will not resign.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. And if you have repeat questions that you've asked, I ask that you ask us new ones so that we can explain further the reforms that we're pushing out and the transformational changes happening within our city. So that is my one ask to reporters who are asking the same questions over and over again. Okay, next is from Pat Doris from KGW. He is having audio issues, so I'm going to read his question for him. What do you say to those who worry that ending gun violence reduction teams and transit police will lead to more violence and or crime? Mayor, that question is for you.
So currently, with regard to the transit police, we have a negotiated agreement with TriMet. Under former Chief Outlaw, we began the process of reviewing whether or not that was the best use of 32 patrol officers. The community has said loudly and clearly that they do not want to see Portland police officers used for that purpose on transit. I do not believe that will lead to less safety on the transit system, because if there is an issue on the transit system, people will still call 911. They will still ask for a police response. The difference will be we will not have people engaged as members of the transit police function. With regard to the gun violence reduction team, there are aspects to that team that definitely deserve to be evaluated. There have been reforms that have already been put into place. Gun violence remains a serious issue in the city. We had over 400 shootings in the city of Portland last year, and we still need that investigative function when there is a shooting in the city of Portland. So there's parts of this team that we still very much need, but I think this is a good time for us to look at how best to address gun violence in this community. So I've asked my Office of Youth Violence Prevention. I'm asking our incoming district attorney, Mike Schmidt, and my colleagues and the Police Bureau to work together with the community to evaluate the best way that we can address gun violence broadly in this community.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, our next question.
I actually believe we have the opportunity here to improve public safety, to increase public safety for Portlanders.
All right, our next question is from Maxine with the Oregonian. Two questions, and I believe you answered part of this, Mayor. With the disbanding of the GVRT, who in the Police Bureau will respond to shootings in the city? That's number one.
I believe that will be patrol, but I will actually turn that over to incoming Chief Leavell to make sure we're accurate on that answer.
We're going to have to figure that piece out. Those shootings have to get investigated. We have officers in that unit and detectives also. So there'll probably be a combination of the detectives doing the investigative piece, either under the detective division or some other format, and then the officers being reassigned.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, so the second question Maxine had, for years there have been calls from the community for a truly independent board with subpoena powers that would investigate allegations of police misconduct up to police shootings. Will you push for such a board to be created in Portland? Mayor?
Hang on, I think I have to restart my video. Oh, here it is. Okay. The answer is yes. The current structure with the Independent Police Review Commission under the auditor and the CRC, that process does not have the public's trust. There are gaps in the way that current structure, the way that we currently do independent police oversight and evaluation. And Commissioner Hardesty and I have had a number of conversations on this subject. She and I together want to lead a process to evaluate both how IPR and CRC works and propose a different structure. The structure we have right now isn't pleasing anybody. It's not doing what we want, and it doesn't have the public's trust in terms of true oversight. And part of the problem right now is that committee doesn't have any real teeth. It doesn't, neither of them have the kind of teeth that true independent oversight requires. And so the commissioner and I are going to work and see if we can work with community, if we can work with the police bureau, if we can work with our independent auditor and come up with a better strategy. It's been a long time since we've reformed that independent oversight and evaluation structure, and it's due for an overhaul.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question is from Alex Zielinski with the Mercury. Hey, Alex.
Hey, sorry about that. I'm curious about the time frame here for the 3 programs that you're announcing disbanding. Is that something that's happening today? Is that happening with the new budget? When can we expect these changes and reshuffling of police officers to begin?
So this is the beginning of that process. As Chief Leavell's answer just suggested on GVRT, we have to have clarity on the landing pad. What's the interim strategy? Where are we headed? So it won't happen today, but it will happen with urgency.
Okay. Our next question is from Rebecca Ellis with OPB. Rebecca.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
You kind of touched on that, but I'm curious what the timing is for the other specialty unit, transit police.
So with regard to the transit police, we're currently in an intergovernmental agreement with TriMet. That intergovernmental agreement expires at the end of the year. We will not renew that on January 1st.
Okay, so there'll still be Portland police officers there until January 1st.
Yeah, and I want to be clear on all of this, sort of a blanket caveat. My colleagues could override me on some of this, but based on the conversations I've had, I don't believe they will.
Okay, my second question is, I'm curious, there have been obviously lots of calls from protesters on defunding the police, and I'm curious to hear what defunding police means to you and what your message would be to the demonstrators making that call.
So I am hearing loudly and clearly from demonstrators that they want fundamental reform. I'm hearing loudly and clearly from demonstrators that they want us to completely reimagine the way that we think about public safety in our community. And I believe these reforms, combined with the resources that I've proposed we send out to the community, I believe those things work together to live up to the promise of that reimagination. If you're asking me, how do these things work together? The answer is it's not just sufficient to change policing. We also have to invest in a community that's been disinvested from for decades.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Jonathan Levinson. Jonathan.
Yeah, hi. GVRT works with federal and local agencies in like the Portland Area Crime Gun Initiative. They leverage tools like the ATF's NIBIN database. Will PPB still be participating in that, or will there still be officers doing that, or is this sort of just a name change, getting rid of the GVRT name, but the functions will stay in place?
Who's the question for?
Mayor, if you can answer that, or if the chief knows the answer.
Yeah, well, I don't know the answer specifically about the database. As I said, some of the functions must continue. There are still shootings in our community. The investigative function still needs to happen. There are likely some partnerships that need to be continued, but we are going to work with the incoming district attorney and with the police bureau and with the community to determine the better way to stop gun violence in our community. The people working on GVRT are outstanding individuals. I'm just not convinced, and others are not convinced, that we've landed on the right structure to really make a meaningful impact reduction in the number of shootings in our community.
Mayor, the next question is.
Can I add to that? In our current setup, the NIBIN piece is done by GVRT officers. They're currently the only ones who are trained to actually operate that system. So without that unit, we won't have anyone to do that portion of the investigation.
Can I ask a follow-up real fast? If a lot of these functions are going to remain in place, or maybe if the NIBIN part's not, but if Mayor, you said a lot of those functions are going to remain, where are the dollar savings coming from?
So there are multiple ways that we have identified dollar reductions. First of all, we're looking at multiple sources, including using flat out reductions, constraints, vacancies, and cannabis dollars.
Jonathan, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The next question, it's a follow-up from Everton Bailey with the Oregonian. Mayor Wheeler, which bureaus will the $5 million of the $12 million to be invested in communities of color come from? And what specific investments will occur?
Well, the answer is I am asking and already have directed through the Chief Administrative Officer that all of our bureaus consider how we can uplift our Black community and our Indigenous and other communities of color through our bureaus. The Police Bureau is the focus because of the murder of George Floyd. The conversation right now is about fundamental policing reform. And I don't want to take away from that moment, and I don't want to lose focus on what the current movement is about. But we also have to talk about the work of other bureaus and other jurisdictions. And so I've asked my bureaus across the city to find us an additional $5 million in addition to the constraints that we've already put forward to help us make new investments in the Black community in Portland.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, our next question. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Never mind.
Our next question is from Mila at KGW. She wants to know if you are considering reassigning the Police Bureau.
Not at this time, no.
Okay. And I see another question in the Q&A section from Rebecca, but I'm assuming that was answered when she asked you. So unless she texts me otherwise, I will move on to the next question. The next question is from Dan Haggerty with KGW. Where do you expect to see any pushback from the police union, and how pivotal are these upcoming contract talks to the level of reform being discussed?
I am grateful for the question because I want to underscore the pace of change that we're asking from the men and women who serve in the Police Bureau. And it's withering. They've been standing out there on the front line throughout the middle of the night. They are tired, they are exhausted as They hear conversations nationally and locally about policing. I know they are hurting. I know their families are hurting. I know that their morale is very low right now. And I want to remind them that this is not about them personally. This is an opportunity for us to really change the way public safety has been done in our community and in our nation. This is really the first time our generation has had the opportunity to throw everything on the wall and ask honestly and with integrity, have we gotten it right? And what the community is telling us overwhelmingly is no, we haven't gotten it right. And so I'm asking a lot from the men and the women in the police bureau. I'm asking them to join me in being as open-minded as possible, as humble as possible, as transparent as we can be with the community about how we can work together to do even better than we're doing right now. I have said many, many times from the podium that I have great confidence in the men and women of the Portland Police Bureau. And I want to be clear, that confidence has not waned at all. I know they're hurting, but I also want to remind them this is really about the institution. It's about the institution of policing. And we have a really amazing opportunity here. The Police Bureau, my colleagues, and me and the community, we have this opportunity to really bring all of our expertise, all of our experience to the table and really get it right. And we cannot do it without the men and women in the Portland Police Bureau. I have two members of my staff that collectively have served in policing for over 4 decades, maybe even closer to 5 decades. It's really hard hearing your life's work called into question. And I get that, I understand that. But this is our opportunity to really take that experience and that life's work and not see this as a referendum on that work or a criticism of the way we've done things or how we've lived our lives or what we've done. This is an opportunity for us to work with community to build something really remarkable, something innovative, something transformative, something new that will improve public safety in our community, because we all know collectively we can do better. I would expect the police union to have differences of opinion about this. I speak to union leadership on a regular basis. I believe we have very good communication and collaboration, and they worked with us as we've talked about how to help balance a budget that was already a very difficult budget before this. And I would expect we'll have some difficult conversations going forward. We'll probably have some heated debates, but I know we all want the same thing. I know we all love this community, we support this community, and we want to see our community be safe. And so the burden is not just on them, and is not just on us. We need our police officers, we need to support them, and they also need to work with us. And the men and women I've talked to, spoken with in the Portland Police Bureau, they're up for it. They're up to it, they're ready for the challenge, and they're ready to be part of history.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question is from KBOO Radio. She has a follow-up.
Yes. Last night, Seattle pulled the police from the streets for the most part, and the protests were the most peaceful they've been since this movement started nearly 2 weeks ago. Would you consider doing the same, pulling the police from the streets during the protests to allow for peaceful protests without the nightly declaration of an unlawful assembly and the ensuing attacks on protesters?
Well, you know, again, as I've said many times, I don't call tactics during an incident. There are people who do that based on the situation on the ground and using the intelligence and the best information they have at the time. And I would not preordain what they should be doing in terms of responding to a situation that has not yet unfolded. So I would not direct that at this moment. But I think you asked, would I be open to it? The answer is yes, of course. If the Police Bureau felt that less engagement or no engagement was the right decision, of course I would support that.
Maybe Police Chief Leavell could respond.
We're in a position where we have to protect the folks who are in the Multnomah County Detention Center, who are also in this building. We've reduced the amount of people that we need to do that to the bare bones level that's required to maintain the safety of this building. We still meet with folks throwing things at us, projectiles and things of that nature. So we have to be able to respond to that immediate situation. But we're going to do what we need to do to protect the folks who are housed in this building.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, our final question is from Alex Zelinsky with the Mercury. She has a question for the Chief. I know you were a student resource officer for years and you have spoken positively about it. Do you support City Council's decision to dissolve that program, and why? Chief Leavell, that's for you.
Yeah, I'm just getting my unmute. That's a tough decision. I spent 4 or 5 years at Jefferson High School, and I know the relationships that were built there. Officers who were in our school police division did an outstanding job connecting with youth, having conversations, building relationships. They did a great job, and it was a great unit. Like the mayor said, we're at a crossroads in policing. We understand some things have to change, and when they do, we have to adapt to them and adjust to them. So it's not a reflection on the officers or the unit or the type of work. It's just the evolution of what we're dealing with at the present time. And my job is to lead the department through these changes.
Thank you, Chief. And I just got some new questions, so we're going to answer a few more. The next question is from Lisa Balick at Coin6. She wants to know, Mayor, what are your plans for CERT, the Special Emergency Response Team? Will you disband it?
I want to know more. I have heard calls to disband it, but I want to know more. The CERT unit would be used in an active shooter situation. I have seen the CERT unit in action in a hostage taking situation. So again, I'd want to know if my colleagues decided to eliminate that unit, what's the alternative plan? What are we replacing it with?
Got it. Okay, last question. Dan Haggerty from KGW. He wants to know, how can $12 million of city money be redirected at a time when COVID has put such a massive strain on the budgets of every department in the city? Where is the money coming from?
So I believe I answered that previously. It will come from a combination of sources, including savings within the Bureau itself, and that could be anything related to materials and service. It could be other savings. It could be putting projects on hold. It will certainly include vacancies, which are currently being held. It will include some cannabis resource as well. So it will be a combination of different items.
Okay. All right.
Different sources is the right way to put it.
Okay, so I think we answered everyone's questions. If you have more questions, you know how to reach me. I want to thank everyone for joining our press conference. Members of the media, just a reminder that you will be getting a press release shortly with a complete list of our proposed reforms.
Eileen, can I say one more thing in response to the question that was just asked? Look, there's no easy answer here. Let's be really clear. Let's be really clear. There's no easy answer here. As I indicated earlier in the press conference, we already were in a tough budget situation. But the community has spoken loudly and clearly. And I have pledged as the mayor to listen, to understand, to consider ideas that are being put forward, and to show real faith in transformational change. So regardless of the situation in which we find ourselves, I believe the burden is on me and it is on us to show that we are committed to transformational change and reimagining how public safety looks in this community. I believe we can find those savings without jeopardizing the public safety, but it won't be easy. If it were easy, we would have done this a long time ago.
Well said, Mayor. Okay, so that wraps up our press conference. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
Good afternoon, everybody.